That is why I have called for red flag laws.
I'm hoping I can find some Democrats that will work with me, starting with the idea of red flag laws.
She's talking about the so-called red flag bill signed by Governor Cuomo with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi by his side.
Support for red flag gun laws, which allow authorities to seize the guns of individuals a court deems a danger or mentally ill, is growing. Despite bipartisan support for these laws, which are already being enacted around the country, there's a dangerous flip side of unseen consequences that will only plunge America deeper into authoritarianism. When the government is allowed to make designations about individuals and restrict their rights as a result, innocent people are always trampled. Remember the blacklist of the McCarthy era? Remember the Japanese internment camps? What about the no-fly list, which provides little due process and consistently incorrectly flags innocent people, including everyone from a 4-year-old and journalists to military veterans and American Muslims who refuse to be informants for the government? As the ACLU has explained, innocent victims are unable to face their accusers, the source of the information that has made them a target, unable to see that information or the criteria by which it was judged, and have no meaningful way to appeal their status. The ACLU of Rhode Island has already expressed concerns about that state's red flag law. While the ACLU of Rhode Island recognizes the bill's laudable goal, we are deeply concerned about its breadth, its impact on civil liberties, and the precedent it sets for the use of coercive measures against individuals not because they are alleged to have committed any crime, but because somebody believes they might someday commit one. Though red flag laws do allow for appeal, we already know from the no-fly list and civil asset forfeiture that these government mechanisms for redress leave much to be desired. In the case of civil asset forfeiture, where police take your cash and property without having to charge you with a crime, innocent people often drown in the appeals process and never regain their stolen property. When it comes to red flag laws, confiscations can be proposed by law enforcement and approved by a judge. Has the American court system given you any reason to believe it can correctly carry out justice? Have the countless innocents thrown in jail based on faulty evidence or for victimless crimes gotten fair treatment? Do you really believe this system will protect the rights of innocent people when it's run by the exact same government that denies due process to American citizens when cops gun them down in the streets, or when the US drone bombs them without trial, or throws non-citizens who are still entitled to constitutional rights in cages? Further, do you really trust the government to accurately assess the mental health of potentially millions of people? Did the government respond competently when they were alerted multiple times about Nicholas Cruz? What about James Holmes? Do you trust a government that through the corruption of Congress and the FDA promotes the drugging of young people with chemicals correlated with violent behavior to correctly judge who is mentally ill and who is not? This is the same institution that threw a veteran into a mental health ward for making posts questioning the government, forced innocent people into psychedelic trials to try to learn mind control tactics, and that is responsible for widespread childhood trauma through nationwide shortcomings in foster care that endangers children. In a country where questioning authority can be deemed a mental illness in the form of oppositional defiant disorder, are you sure you want to give the government more authority to determine someone's mental health and restrict their rights as a result? Can you imagine how giving the government more authority to do that might be playing with fire?
Those people not only get treatment, but when necessary, involuntary confinement.
Do you think an authoritarian administration like Trump's, which repeatedly orders and condones violence, whether abroad or domestically, has good intentions in calling to regulate speech in the form of video games? In blaming the internet and calling on social media companies to catch would-be criminals? Of supporting red flag gun laws? Whether you're on the left and want gun control no matter who's in power, or on the right and one of those rationalizing Trump's calls for more gun control, root of America's violence problem has very little to do with guns and everything to do with what happens when extremely sick individuals are steeped in a culture that glorifies violence. Mad about video games even though research repeatedly shows they don't cause violence? Well, what do many popular video games have in common? They're soldier and war games. Who does our society revere most? The troops who commit violence in our name and receive the utmost respect from both sides of the partisan political spectrum.
A kid graduating high school this year hasn't seen a day of peace in his entire life. He's been at war the entire time. Violence is the answer. They're heroes, right? They got one of these. Looks just like this. They got one of these. They're heroes because they're solving their problems because they're real men.
Is it really surprising that many shooters have military backgrounds or obsessions? Our culture also glorifies the police for protecting and serving us with guns. Same police who inflict gun violence against unarmed citizens and will use violence to seize guns. They've already done so. Mass shootings are obviously a problem, even if they represent only a small fraction of gun deaths in the US. But the answer is not to give more power to a government that characteristically relies on violence to sustain its authority and has molded an entire culture and society around celebrating it. The only way the government can try to keep people from having guns or force them to do anything else is to use guns. If you still think red flag gun laws are part of the solution, keep in mind all the bipartisan efforts that have come before. The codification of the government's right to indefinitely detain citizens without trial, the widespread mass surveillance of innocent people, government and politicians' insidious collusion with the corporations that pay them off, the $22.5 trillion debt with no resolution in sight, the war on drugs, which has heightened the police state and victimized nonviolent people, and the American empire's endless wars, which perfectly illustrate our society's fixation on violence. And none of these intrusive, oppressive policies would be possible without the population's bipartisan participation in America's electoral system. Regardless of your view on the Second Amendment, it's a right. Would you support stripping someone of their right to vote without real due process based on a murky government checklist? Remember, people's votes have killed far more people than mass shootings.